The top 5 killers in history and today. Pre-1900, you look at pneumonia and influenza, tuberculosis, gastrointestinal infections, and heart valvular disease caused by streptococcus. These were infectious diseases that were the majority causes of death among our populations. However, now, heart disease, cancer, drug medical errors, chronic respiratory disease, and cerebrovascular disease, all degenerative disease, are now the top killers in our society. For thousands and thousands of years, degenerative diseases, for the most part, did not exist. However, in the last 100 years, due to the changes in our food and our diet, metabolic disease is now the main driver and cause of death in our populations. At the rate we are going, humans are on their way to an extinction. Genetics has not changed in the last 100 years. And for thousands of years, there have been little to no degenerative diseases. There has been a dramatic escalation of metabolic diseases, degenerative disabilities, and death. Cardiovascular, which includes coronary heart disease, is the number one killer. Over 931,000 deaths annually. Cancer is the second leading cause of death with over 600,000 per year. Deaths attributable to obesity is third at over 224,000 deaths annually. Alzheimer's is the fourth leading cause of death at 119,000 people per year. Diabetes causes the death of over 103,000 people a year, and liver disease at 56,000 people a year. The sources are Center for Disease Control and the American Heart Association. So let's look and see how the American population is actually doing. Currently, we have 335 million people in America. And we go back to the populations of 1850, 1900, 1950, the year 2000. And you can see as the population grows, there were times we didn't have metabolic disease. But as we've made changes in our food system, our metabolic disease expression has begun to climb. Currently, we have in excess of 90% of the U.S. population is metabolically unhealthy. 73% of the U.S. population is overweight, 245 million Americans. 60%, or just over 200 million Americans, have at least one metabolic syndrome. 50% of the U.S. population, or 168 million Americans, have high blood pressure. 48.6% of Americans have cardiovascular disease. That's 163 million Americans. 46.4% of Americans are pre-diabetic. That's almost 156 million people. 45% of our population have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. That's over 150 million people. 43% of the population is obese, almost another 145 million Americans. 40% of the U.S. populations have multiple metabolic syndromes. That's almost 135 million Americans. 18% of Americans are severely obese, which is over 60 million Americans. 12% of our population is diabetic, over 40 million Americans. 8.3% suffer from depression, anxiety. another 28 million Americans, and 5% of Americans are living with cancer, over 17 million of us. As you look at these metabolic disorders and you look at the timeline when they started, we begin to understand that these things that did not exist in the human population are now overwhelmingly present. And so what is the driving cause behind these metabolic diseases? Section 3, summary. The shift from infectious diseases to degenerative diseases. Degenerative diseases have replaced infectious diseases as the primary cause of death. Ancestrally, for about 6,000 years, very little, if any, degenerative diseases were caused by whole foods and saturated animal fats. But in the last 100 years, we have completely destroyed our food safety by replacing it with refined carbohydrates, sugars, and unhealthy fats that are highly oxidative and inflammatory promoting fats. Currently, only 5 out of 100 people in the U.S. population are now metabolically healthy. Almost everyone is, has, and or knows someone currently battling with one or multiple metabolic diseases.